He had loved her for 11 years, stood beside her through every victory, every failure, every version of herself she became, and never once told her. Then came the day she walked down the aisle toward another man, and Landon Pierce made a decision that would either destroy their friendship forever or finally give them both the life they were always supposed to have. What happened next shocked everyone in that vineyard, including Victoria herself. If this story finds you wherever you are tonight, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, printed on cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, tucked inside an envelope that smelled faintly of something expensive. Mr. Landon Pierce and guest. He had read it standing at his kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. His 7-year-old daughter Maisie, spinning circles in the living room behind him, her socks sliding on the hardwood floor, one arm outstretched like she was trying to balance on an invisible beam. He had read it twice. Then he set it down, picked up his coffee, and stood there looking at nothing until Maisie crashed into the couch and started laughing. "Daddy, Daddy, did you see that?" "Yeah, Bug, I saw it." He had not seen it. He had been elsewhere entirely, standing in a vineyard in his mind, watching a woman in white walk toward a man he didn't particularly like, smiling a smile that he had spent 11 years memorizing. The invitation had been sitting on his kitchen windowsill ever since, angled against the glass so the morning light caught the gold lettering. He had not RSVP'd for 5 days, which was unlike him. He was usually the first to respond to anything Victoria sent him. She could text him at 2 in the morning during a company crisis and have his attention in under 3 minutes. She had tested this, accidentally and on purpose, at least a dozen times over the years. He always showed up. So of course he was going to the wedding. He knew that before he even opened the envelope. What? The drive to Dunmore Vineyard took 2.5 hours on a Saturday morning in late September, the kind of morning where the sky was still holding on to summer, but the air had already made up its mind about fall. Maisie had fallen asleep in the back seat somewhere around the 40-minute mark, her head tipped sideways, her mouth open slightly, one hand still loosely gripping a crayon she'd been using to color a dinosaur before her eyes gave out on her. Landon drove with the radio low. Nothing he could name playing, just noise filling space. He thought about the rehearsal dinner the night before, which he had attended because Victoria had asked him to, and which he had survived by standing near the buffet table most of the evening, talking to a few people he recognized from Victoria's college years, a couple of her board members he'd met at various company events, and her younger brother Cal, who had cornered him near the bar and said, unprompted, "I still think it should have been you." Landon had laughed like it was a joke. Cal had not laughed. "I'm serious, man. You know her better than anyone alive. You know what she takes in her coffee. You know when she's actually okay, and when she's pretending. Marcus doesn't know any of that stuff. He knows her bank balance and her dress size." "Cal, I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Nobody else is thinking it." Cal had looked at him for a long moment, the way younger brothers sometimes look at grown men when they think those men are being deliberately stupid. "You should think about it," he said, and then someone called his name from across the room and he walked away. Landon had stood there with his drink and thought about exactly nothing, which was the most effective method he had developed for situations like that one. He was good at not thinking about it. He had been practicing for 11 years. They had met when Landon was 21 and Victoria was 19. He had been a junior in college studying architecture, working part-time at a hardware store on weekends to cover what his scholarship didn't. She had been a second-year student who had walked into that hardware store on a Sunday afternoon in February, carrying a broken lamp and a very specific idea of how she wanted it fixed. The conversation had lasted 40 minutes. The lamp repair had taken 10 of those minutes. The other 30 had involved a debate about whether good design was inherently democratic or whether it was, at its core, an elitist language that only certain people were taught to read. She had argued the latter with the kind of confidence that made him think she had been having versions of this argument since she was about 12 years old. He had argued the former, mostly because he believed it, but also because he could see she was waiting for someone to push back, and she was going to be disappointed if nobody did. They exchanged numbers over the lamp. He told himself it was because she seemed like an interesting person to know, which was true. It was also not the whole truth. But the whole truth was something he learned to file away. methodically, over the years that followed. He filed it under friendship and professional respect and mutual support and all the other words that are accurate but incomplete. He watched her build a startup from a dorm room idea into a company that made the cover of Forbes before she was 28. He watched her get her heart broken at 23 by a man who didn't deserve the attention she gave him. He watched her lose her father to a sudden illness when she was 25 and held her hand at the funeral because she'd asked him to and because he would have anyway. He was there for all of it, and she was there for him too. When his daughter's mother walked out 18 months after Maisie was born, not cruelly, not with anger, but with the quiet honesty of a person who had discovered too late that she was not built for the life she'd agreed to. Victoria had driven 3 hours to sit with him in his apartment while Maisie slept in the other room, and she had not offered a single piece of advice unless he asked for one. She had just been there, present. Warm in the particular way that Victoria was warm, which was not soft exactly, but steady, like standing next to a wall that isn't going anywhere. He had loved her then too. He loved her most days. He loved her in the way you love something you've decided you can't have, which means you love it carefully, from a maintained distance, making sure the love doesn't bleed into spaces where it doesn't belong. He had gotten very good at this, right up until this morning, anyway. Dunmore Vineyard was beautiful in the way that places are beautiful when someone with a great deal of money and excellent taste has spent considerable energy making them so. The property sprawled across 40 acres of rolling Northern California hills, the vines stripped back to their autumn skeleton now, rows of brown and burgundy stretching toward the tree line. The main pavilion was framed in white oak, strung with lights that would matter more once the sun went down, and the ceremony space itself was positioned at the crest of a gentle slope, looking out over the longest view on the property. Somebody had done their homework. Landon parked and helped Maisie out of the back seat, smoothing the wrinkles from the front of her dress, dark blue with small white flowers. Her idea, non-negotiable, while she tilted her head back and stared at the sky. "It's really big," she said. "The sky?" "The whole place. All of it." "Yeah," he said. "It is. Is Victoria going to be pretty?" "Victoria's always pretty, Bug." "I know, but is she going to be wedding pretty?" Maisie looked up at him with the very serious expression she deployed for questions that mattered. "Because that's different. That's the prettiest kind." Landon took her hand. "I think she's going to be exactly that kind." They walked toward the pavilion together, Maisie pointing out things along the path. A bird she couldn't name. A stone sculpture that she decided looked like a sleeping fox. A row of white chairs where two older women in wide-brimmed hats were already seated and appeared very committed to being the first guest to arrive. Landon let her talk. He listened with one part of his attention while the other part was doing something he didn't have a word for. Bracing, maybe. Settling himself. He had been to other weddings in his adult life, cousins, college friends, colleagues. He understood the architecture of a wedding, the way a ceremony is designed to create a specific feeling in the people watching, the combination of music and movement and ritual that is specifically calibrated to produce emotion. He was not normally susceptible to it. He tended to sit in the middle rows, feel appropriately moved during the vows, eat decent food afterward, and leave at a reasonable hour. This was different, obviously. He knew that. He had been practicing not knowing it since the invitation arrived, but standing here now, on this property, watching white-coated staff arrange flowers at the end of each row of chairs, he allowed himself one honest moment of acknowledgement. This was going to be one of the harder things he had done. Then Maisie asked if the flowers were real, and he told her they were, and she asked if she could smell one, and he said no, and she asked why, and he said because it was someone else's wedding, and she said that was a dumb rule, and he said maybe, but it still applied, and by the time they reached their seats, the honest moment had passed, and he was just a man at a wedding again. He found them seats on the far left, third row from the back, close enough to see clearly, far enough from the center aisle to feel like an observer rather than a participant. Maisie settled in beside him and immediately started asking questions about who various arriving guests were, most of which he couldn't answer. Cal found them about 20 minutes later, sliding into the empty seat on Landon's other side and looking slightly flushed, like he'd been running. "You made it," he said. "Of course I made it." "She was asking about you this morning. In her room, before they started getting her ready. She asked if you were coming. Landon looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her obviously you were coming, that you'd never miss it. Cal glanced at Maisie, who was examining the program she'd been handed by a passing usher with the focused attention of someone who intended to understand every word. Hey, Maisie. Hi, Cal. She did not look up from the program. Cal smiled and turned back to Landon, lower now. How are you doing? And I mean that as a real question, not a social one. I'm fine. Landon. I'm here, Cal. I'm at the wedding. That's the answer to that question. Cal studied him for a moment. Whatever he found in Landon's expression seemed to satisfy him, or at least convince him that pushing further would be pointless. He nodded once, settled back in his chair, and said, Okay, in the quiet voice people use when they mean something different. The music started soon after. Something classical, live strings from a quartet positioned near the pavilion entrance. The hum of conversation among the guests dimmed and then went mostly quiet. People straightened in their chairs, angling their bodies toward the aisle. Landon looked straight ahead. The procession began, bridesmaids and groomsmen in pairs, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of people who had been rehearsed, most of them smiling with the bright, slightly fixed expression of people who were aware of being looked at. He recognized a few faces. Some he didn't. He noted Marcus Shaw among the groomsmen, tall and square-jawed and immaculately put together, the kind of man who photographs well, and he felt the familiar low-grade sensation he always felt in Marcus's presence. Not quite dislike, not quite jealousy, something less clean than either. He had met Marcus 14 months ago, at a company event Victoria had brought him to. Marcus had shaken his hand with the confident grip of a man who shakes a lot of hands, called him the famous Landon in a way that was technically warm, but felt like a flag being planted. They had talked for about 11 minutes, during which Marcus had asked him twice what he did for work, and once, whether he and Victoria had ever had a thing, the phrase delivered with a practiced smile that could be interpreted multiple ways. Landon had said no both times, to the work question and to the personal one. Marcus had nodded like he already knew the answer and was just confirming it. He was not a man Landon had ever been able to clearly dislike, which in some ways was the most unsettling thing about him. He was adequate on every surface, pleasant at reasonable intervals, successful in ways that were real and measurable. Victoria had described him, when she first mentioned him to Landon, as someone who made her feel taken care of, which was a phrase Landon had repeated to himself in the dark several times afterward, trying to figure out why it bothered him. It bothered him because it described something he had never been able to give her. Not because he hadn't wanted to, but because there was a specific kind of care that a partner provides and a friend provides, and those are different shapes, and he had always been very careful to occupy only the shape he was permitted. Marcus had a different set of permissions. Landon was thinking about none of this when the music shifted. The string quartet moved into the processional. Something sweeping, something designed specifically to lift people to their feet, which it did, the entire crowd rising in a smooth wave from front to back. Landon stood. Beside him, Maisie scrambled to her feet and craned her neck toward the far end of the aisle and said in a reverent half-whisper, "Oh, she's wedding pretty." Landon turned. Victoria was at the entrance of the ceremony space, her arm threaded through the arm of an uncle who had agreed to walk her in after her father's passing. Her dress was something simple by the standards of this setting. No cathedral train, no elaborate beadwork, just clean ivory silk that caught the morning light and held it. Her hair was up, loose at the edges. She was carrying white ranunculus, small and round, clutched at hip height. She was looking straight down the aisle. She was smiling. But Landon had known Victoria Sinclair for 11 years, and he knew the difference between a smile she meant and a smile she was performing. He knew the specific quality of her stillness when something was wrong, the way her chin lifted a fraction of an inch when she was bracing herself, the way her eyes went slightly too focused when she was holding something back. She was doing all of those things right now. He almost said something, not to anyone in particular. The impulse arrived, and he pressed it down because it wasn't his moment, and she was already moving, and the music was carrying the whole crowd forward on a current of emotion that was not his to interrupt. So he watched. She started down the aisle, her uncle steady beside her. The guests on both sides leaned slightly inward, the way crowds do, drawn by the ceremony of it. Some people were filming. Several women near the front were already pressing fingers to their eyes. The music swelled at the right moment, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Landon watched her face. She was 20 feet from the altars when she saw it. He saw her see it because he was watching her and not the altar. And what crossed her expression in that moment was not something that had a clean name. It was the look of a person whose internal architecture has just been revised without their consent. A brief, total recalculation happening behind her eyes, visible only for a second before she locked it back down. Her pace didn't break. He would give her that. She kept walking because she was Victoria, and she had been trained by a specific kind of life to keep walking when things went wrong. But something had happened at that altar. He turned to look. Marcus Shaw was no longer standing where a groom stands. He was standing to the side, slightly apart from his groomsmen, his expression carrying the look of a man who has made a decision and hates that he made it and is going to make it anyway. His hands were at his sides, his jaw was set, and as Landon watched, Marcus said something too low to carry above the music, just the shape of words, to his best man, who received them with the frozen expression of someone who has just been handed a live wire. Victoria had stopped. She was 5 feet from the altar. The music was still playing, not yet aware that it should stop. The guests nearest the front had begun to turn and see, a slow wave of realization moving backward through the crowd, people lowering their phones, exchanging looks, that particular social paralysis settling over the space, everyone understanding simultaneously that something was very wrong and no one knowing what a person does with that. Marcus said something else, still quiet, looked at Victoria. And then he walked. Not toward her, not toward the altar. He walked away from it. The music stopped. No one gave the signal. The quartet simply felt the silence coming and stepped aside for it. The last note dropped out, and what replaced it was the kind of quiet that has weight, that presses against you, that carries inside it every unasked question in the room. Victoria stood at the end of the aisle. Her uncle's arm was still in hers. His face was the face of a man who has just watched something hit the ground and doesn't know yet if it's going to shatter. Victoria did not move. She was looking at the space where Marcus had been standing, now occupied by empty air and 3 increasingly uncomfortable groomsmen who had nobody to instruct them. The flowers in her hands had dropped slightly, and in the terrible, complete silence, one white ranunculus petal detached and drifted down and landed at her feet. Landon heard someone near the back say, "Oh my God," in a voice barely above a whisper. He heard a phone camera shutter click somewhere to his left. He heard Maisie say quietly, "Daddy, what's happening?" He said, "Stay here, Bug." He pressed her gently back into her seat. "Stay with Cal. I'll be right back." He was already moving, but he didn't think about it. That was the truest thing he could say about what happened in the next 30 seconds. There was no deliberation, no internal debate, no weighing of consequences. He was in his seat, and then he was on his feet, and then he was moving down the side of the aisle, not running, not pushing past anyone, just moving with the particular directness of a person who knows exactly where they're going. He heard murmuring begin as he passed the rows. He felt eyes follow him. He did not look left or right. Victoria had not moved. She was still standing in the same position, the loose strand of hair at her temple lifting slightly in the breeze that had come up from the vineyard. Her chin was at that specific angle, that fraction of an inch lift that meant she was holding the whole structure together by will alone. He reached her and stopped. She heard him before she turned. He watched her, registered the footsteps, the proximity, and then she turned her head, and her eyes found his face, and something in them shifted. "Hey," he said. It was not a brilliant thing to say. He would acknowledge that later. In the middle of all that space and silence, and the weight of 250 people watching, and the aftermath of a man walking away from her at the altar, he said, "Hey," like he'd just run into her at the coffee shop. But something happened to her face when he said it. The lockdown version of herself eased, slightly, involuntarily, the way a muscle releases when pressure is finally removed. "Landon?" Her voice was steady. She was good at steady. "You don't have to." "I know." He took her hand. She let him. Her fingers closed around his with a grip that was not casual. "I know I don't have to." Behind them, the crowd had gone from murmuring to nearly silent again, trying to understand what they were watching. At the altar, the officiant had taken 2 steps back, hands clasped, the expression of a person trying to be professionally invisible. The groomsmen had drifted sideways, unsure of their purpose. Marcus was no longer visible at all. Landon was aware of all of this in the peripheral way you are aware of weather when you're already committed to being outside. He was looking at Victoria. She was looking at him with the expression she wore when she was reading a situation from multiple angles simultaneously, processing, recalibrating, deciding what this meant. It was the expression that meant she was not panicking. She was thinking, and she was holding his hand like it was the one fixed point in a room that was shifting. "Are you okay?" he said. "No," she said. "Not even a little bit." "Okay. But I'm not going to fall apart in front of all these people." "I know. I need—" She stopped, swallowed, looked away from him for a moment, toward the vineyard, the rows of bare vines, the middle distance where nothing needed anything from her. "I just need a minute." "Take it," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." A woman in the front row made a small sound that might have been a stifled sob. Someone behind them coughed. A phone camera clicked again. Landon heard it and had a single flash of the image it was capturing right now. The abandoned bride and the man who had come to stand beside her, framed by the arch, the vineyard behind them, the afternoon light going gold. He wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the fact that Victoria's hand was shaking, slightly, a fine tremor she was clearly trying not to transmit, and that he had never in 11 years seen her hands shake. "Victoria," he said. She turned back to him. He opened his mouth to say something sensible, something supportive and correctly calibrated to the moment, something a good friend says when a good friend shows up. He had no idea what any of those things were right now. They had evacuated him completely, every prepared version of the appropriate thing, and what came up instead was 11 years of careful filing and precise maintenance in all the spaces he had been so deliberate about not occupying, and what he said was, "I'm not here because you need someone to save you. I know you don't need that. I'm here because I—" He stopped. She was watching him very carefully. Around them, the vineyard was absolutely still. "I've been in love with you for so long," he said, "that I can't actually remember deciding to be. It feels like something that was already true when I met you, and I've just been pretending it wasn't." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. Victoria did not move. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at him 1,000 times before, across 1,000 ordinary moments, across restaurant tables and conference room doorways and the hallway of his apartment at 2 in the morning, but not the way she'd looked at him. Something was different in it now. Something that had always been at the edge of it was suddenly at the center. "Landon." Her voice came out quiet, almost careful. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know this is the worst possible. Stop." She said it gently. "Just stop for a second." He stopped. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes are bright when something is trying to surface that has been submerged for a long time. 11 years, she said. "Yeah." "You did this for 11 years and never said anything." "You were building something," he said. "You were always building something. I didn't want to be the thing that complicated it." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite, something raw at the edges of it. "You're the only person in my life who's never complicated anything, Landon. Everything you've done for 11 years has been the opposite of complicated. It's been the clearest, most reliable—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. The tremor in her hand was gone. It had stopped sometime in the last 30 seconds without him noticing. She looked up. "How long?" she said. "How long what?" "How long exactly? When you knew?" He thought about a hardware store on a Sunday afternoon in February. A broken lamp. A conversation about design that ran 40 minutes when it should have been 10. "The lamp," he said. Victoria stared at him. "The lamp. First conversation we ever had. I knew when we were arguing about whether good design is democratic." Her voice had changed. Something in it was very quiet and very awake at the same time. "I remember that conversation." "I know you do. You let me win that argument." "I did not. You absolutely let me win. I've thought about that conversation 100 times, and I've always wondered why you let me win when you clearly had the better argument. Her eyes were doing something he had never quite seen them do before. Was it because, yes, he said, probably. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Around them, 250 people were holding their breath, or seemed to be, and somewhere behind them Marcus Shaw was presumably somewhere on this property, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the afternoon's events, and the officiant was standing under the arch with nowhere else to be, and Cal was somewhere in the crowd trying very hard not to say, "I told you so." Victoria Sinclair looked at Landon Pierce in the middle of the wreckage of her carefully planned future. The white ranunculus petals scattered on the ground around her feet, the afternoon light coming in long and gold off the hills, and she said, "I'm going to need you to say it again." "Which part?" "The part where you say you love me. I want to hear it when I'm actually listening for it, not," her voice went a little rough, "not when I'm also processing everything else." He looked at her. He looked at the woman he had known when she was 19 and had a broken lamp and a very specific idea about design. The woman he had watched build a company and bury a father and recover from a broken heart and build herself back up again every time with the particular competence of someone who had decided very early that she would not be destroyed by things that happened to her. The woman who had shown up in his apartment in the dark after Emma left, who had known without being told that what he needed was not advice but presence. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you for 11 years. I will probably love you for 11 more. And I would have kept not saying it forever except that I watched that man walk away from you and I couldn't—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to because Victoria had closed the small distance between them and kissed him. It was not a graceful kiss. She was still holding the flowers, and they got pressed between them and shed 3 more petals. And she made a small sound against his mouth that was not romantic exactly, but was deeply human, the sound of something finally released. His hand came up to the back of her neck, automatically, the way his hands had always wanted to do and had always been directed somewhere more appropriate. The crowd erupted, not in the polished, coordinated way that crowds respond to scripted moments. It was messy and human and real, people laughing, a couple of people actively crying now, applause that started in one section and spread unevenly, someone near the back letting out a sound that was almost a cheer, and then thought better of it, and then didn't. From somewhere in the middle, in a high, clear voice that cut through everything, "Go, Daddy!" Landon pulled back and looked toward the sound. Maisie was on her feet, both arms raised, the program still in one hand, her face wearing the expression of someone who has just witnessed the conclusion of a story she had always known the ending of, and who is extremely pleased to have been right. Beside her, Cal had his face in his hands. His shoulders were shaking, but not from crying. Victoria made that almost laugh sound again, against Landon's shoulder, and this time it was all the way to a laugh, broken and real and loud enough that the people in the first row could hear it clearly. He felt it against his chest, her forehead pressed to his shoulder, the flowers still in her hand now pointing toward the ground, forgotten. "Your daughter," she said, "is the best person at this wedding." "She's the best person at most places," he said. Victoria lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, though the tears hadn't made it past the edges. Her lipstick was not what it had been. Her hair had come down another degree. She looked at him with the expression he was going to spend a very long time learning to understand, the one that was entirely new, that had never been in the rotation of the 11 years that came before. "What happens now?" she said. Landon looked at her, at the vineyard around them, at the scattered flowers at their feet, at the 250 witnesses to the complete structural failure of the afternoon's intended events. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm not leaving." She considered this. "Okay," she said. "That's actually the only thing I needed to hear." She turned and looked at the waiting crowd, at her uncle, who had released her arm at some point during all of this, and was now standing to the side with the complicated expression of a man who will be telling the story at every family gathering for the next 20 years, at the bridesmaids who had slowly redistributed themselves during the chaos, at the officiant still under the arch, waiting, at Maisie, who was still standing in her row, waiting. Victoria reached back and took Landon's hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go get my niece." And they walked together back down the aisle. Not married, not even close, The ceremony a wreck. The afternoon completely off any script anyone had written, and none of it was clean or resolved or settled in any of the ways that people hope things will be settled when they picture the moments that change their lives. It was just two people walking toward a 7-year-old in a blue dress who was waiting at the end of the row with both arms open and a very satisfied expression, like she had been waiting for exactly this, from exactly the beginning. The vineyard staff had cleared the ceremony space by 5 o'clock. Someone, Landon never found out who, had quietly arranged for the reception dinner to become simply a dinner, the seating cards collected, the place settings redistributed, the wedding cake moved to a back table where it sat for 3 hours before someone eventually cut it without ceremony and passed slices around because it seemed wasteful not to. The band played anyway. Nobody danced for the first hour. Then Cal got a glass of wine in him and pulled one of the bridesmaids onto the floor, and after that it became slightly less of a memorial and slightly more of a gathering. Victoria sat at a table near the edge of the pavilion with Landon on one side and Maisie on the other, and she ate most of her dinner, which surprised him. He had expected her to pick at it. She didn't. She ate with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that falling apart on an empty stomach is less dignified than falling apart on a full one. And she drank 2 glasses of wine slowly over the course of 2 hours, which was not enough to change anything about her except to make the set of her shoulders marginally less precise. Maisie fell asleep in the chair beside her somewhere around 7, her head tipping sideways until it landed against Victoria's arm, and Victoria looked down at her for a long moment with an expression Landon couldn't quite catalog. Not maternal exactly, not yet. It was something more tentative than that, like a person standing at the edge of something they want to step into but haven't decided their footing is right. She let Maisie sleep there, adjusted her arm so the angle was better, so the small head had more support, without making a production of it. Landon watched this from his peripheral vision and said nothing. Cal came by the table twice. The first time he sat with them for 20 minutes and talked about nothing, a project he was working on, a restaurant he'd been meaning to try, a movie he'd seen the week before and hadn't liked. He was very deliberately not talking about the afternoon, and Landon recognized the specific kindness in that. The second time, he just rested a hand briefly on Victoria's shoulder as he passed, and she reached up and covered his hand with hers for a second, and that was the whole exchange. The guests filtered out gradually. Most of them had the decency to leave without approaching the table directly, though a few of Victoria's closer friends made their way over at various points. Careful, brief conversations, hands squeezed, nothing requiring a real answer. Victoria handled all of it with a composure that Landon found both impressive and faintly alarming. He knew her well enough to know that composure this sustained was not free. Something was being deferred. By 8:30, most of the tables were empty. The band had stopped. The lights strung above the pavilion were doing their job now, the sky having gone fully dark, and the vineyard beyond the edge of the event space was invisible. Just the smell of it, dry and faintly sweet, carried in on the air. "She's really out," Victoria said, looking at Maisie. "She was up at 6 this morning. She was very invested in getting ready. She looked beautiful. Don't tell her that or she'll be up at 6 every morning for the rest of her life." Victoria smiled, small and real. Then it faded, not quickly, just the way things fade when the thing propping them up has been used up. Landon looked at her. "You don't have to hold it together right now. There's nobody left to hold it together for." "I know." "Victoria, I know, Landon. I just—" She stopped, pressed one finger to the space between her eyebrows, a gesture he'd seen her make in long meetings when something wasn't resolving the way it should. "I keep running the timeline, trying to figure out when I stopped reading the situation clearly. I'm good at reading situations. I'm professionally good at it, and I missed this one completely." "That's not—" "I knew something was off," she said, and the measured tone had something rougher underneath it now. "Not today, weeks ago, maybe longer. There were things he said that didn't, and I explained them to myself. I built an argument for each one. I'm very good at building arguments." She laughed, and it had nothing happy in it. "I basically talked myself into a wedding." Landon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What did you actually want?" She looked at him. "What?" "Not what you planned. Not what made sense. What did you actually want, underneath all the arguments you built?" She was quiet for long enough that the question had time to fully settle. Then she said quietly, "I wanted someone who would have stayed." He didn't say anything to that. There was nothing to say to it that wouldn't be too much or not enough. So he just let it be what it was. After a moment, she said, "He called me twice today while we were still here. I didn't pick up. Did you want to?" "No." She said it without hesitation, which told him something. Whatever he was going to say, I didn't want to hear it tonight. Okay. Is that terrible? It's reasonable. Those aren't the same thing. No, he said. They're not. But it's both. She looked at him for a moment in the particular way she was still learning to look at him. Or relearning, maybe. Recalibrating 11 years of looking at a friend and discovering that the image had more in it than she'd been accounting for. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" "The thing I keep coming back to, not Marcus, not any of it, is that conversation in the hardware store. The lamp. I've thought about that conversation so many times over the years, and I always thought it was just because it was how we met. But I think I was—" She stopped again, shook her head slightly. "I think I was trying to understand something about it, and I kept looking in the wrong direction." "What direction were you looking?" "At the argument," she said, "about design, about what we believed. I kept thinking I remembered it so clearly because it was interesting." She looked at her hands on the table. "But I think what I actually remembered was how it felt to have someone argue back, like I was worth the argument." Landon said nothing for a moment. Then, "You are worth the argument. You're exhausting to argue with, but you're worth it." She laughed again, and this time it was real. Short and slightly broken around the edges, but real. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a second. Then she put her hand down and looked at him with the new expression, the one that still didn't have a name. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. "With you. With today. I don't know what—" "You don't have to know tonight," he said. "Landon, I mean it. There's no timeline here. There's no board meeting. Nothing has to be decided before we leave this table." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's not how you operate either. You're as bad as I am." "I know, but I'm trying to be better about it." "Since when?" "Since about 3 hours ago, honestly." She smiled and held it this time. It was tired and unpolished, and it reached her eyes, and it was nothing like the smile she'd had walking down the aisle. It was better than that smile. It was her actual face. Maisie stirred against her arm, made a small sound, resettled without waking. "I should get her to bed," Landon said. "Where are you staying tonight?" "There's a hotel about 20 minutes out. I booked it months ago." He paused. "What about you?" "They gave me the main house here, part of the package." She said package with the tone of someone noting an irony too tired to be funny. "I'm not driving anywhere tonight." "Do you want me to—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Do you want company, or do you want to be alone?" She thought about it, which he appreciated. She didn't give him the automatic answer. "I think I need to be alone for a few hours," she said, "to actually feel what I'm feeling without managing it for someone else's benefit." "That's fair." "But I don't want—" She looked at him. "I don't want this to be the end of the conversation. Whatever this is, I don't want to wake up tomorrow and have it be one of those things that happened in an extreme moment, and then both people quietly agree to step back from. It's not going to be that." "How do you know?" "Because I've had 11 years of stepping back," he said. "I'm done with it. Whatever happens from here, I'm done with the stepping back." She looked at him for a long moment, reading him, the way she read everything, carefully, from multiple angles. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. She nodded once. He carefully extracted Maisie from beside her, a process that involved repositioning twice and one nearly awake murmur of "I wasn't sleeping," and got his daughter settled against his shoulder, her weight familiar and heavy and warm. He stood. Victoria stood too. They walked together to the edge of the pavilion where the lit space ended and the dark began, the vineyard invisible beyond it. She had her shoes in one hand. He didn't remember her taking them off. "Call me tomorrow," she said. "I will." "Early." "Not—" She glanced at Maisie, then back at him. "Not 7 in the morning early, but don't make me wait until noon." 9, he said. 9, she agreed. He started to turn toward the parking area, then stopped. "Victoria." She looked at him. For what it's worth, he said, whatever he was or wasn't, he didn't leave because something was wrong with you. Don't let tonight turn into a story where the moral is something about you. She was quiet for a moment. You don't know that. I know you. That's close enough. She looked at him, and her eyes were doing the bright thing again, just at the edges, contained but present. Go put your daughter to bed, she said, not unkindly. He went. The hotel was a 30-minute drive in the dark, and Maisie slept through all of it, barely stirring when he transferred her from the car to the bed, pulling off her shoes and tucking the blanket around her while she made the small, unconscious sounds of a child who has had a very full day and has already processed and filed everything that needs processing. Landon sat on the edge of the other bed in the dark room for a long time. He was not processing. He was not planning. He was just sitting with the fact that 11 years of careful maintenance had in the space of one afternoon been completely dismantled, and the sensation of that was not what he had expected. He had expected relief, maybe. Or fear. He had gotten some of both. But underneath them was something else. Something quieter and more disorienting. The feeling of a weight that has been so long in place that you've stopped noticing it, and then it's gone, and the absence of it is something you have to adjust to. He lay back on the bed, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. His phone had 11 text messages. He had looked at none of them. Several were from friends who had been at the wedding. He could guess the contents. One was from his mother, who had heard through some family network that apparently operated at remarkable speed. 2 were from colleagues who somehow already knew, which meant someone at the vineyard had been very active on social media. 1 was from a number he didn't recognize, sent at 6:47 that evening. He looked at it for a long time before he opened it. I think you should know that what you did today was done for the right reasons. I'm not angry at you. But understand, I'm not finished either. No signature. The number was a 415 area code, San Francisco. He didn't need a name. He set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark looking at nothing until sleep came, which took a long time. He called at 9:04. She answered on the second ring. You're 4 minutes late, she said. Maisie wanted pancakes. I'll allow it. A pause. I didn't sleep. Any? Maybe 2 hours. I kept... She stopped, started differently. I went through the last 14 months, every conversation, every time something felt off and I rationalized it. I have a very good memory, which is not useful in this particular context. Did it help, going through it? No, but I had to do it anyway. Yeah, he said. I know. He sent me a message last night. Long one. Wants to meet. Landon was quiet for a moment. Maisie was across the breakfast table, drawing something in the margin of the hotel notepad, her half-finished pancakes pushed to the side. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I think I have to deal with it at some point, but not... Her voice went briefly flat. Not because I'm considering going back. That's not on the table. It's just that there are shared things, professional things. Some of them involve people I actually care about. Okay? You're not going to tell me what to do. No. Most people would. I know, he said. That's not useful to you. She was quiet for a second. I need to go back to the city today. I've got a board call Monday morning, and I haven't looked at my email in 18 hours, which means I currently have approximately 400 things requiring my attention. That's a conservative estimate. Very. Can I... She paused, and in the pause he could hear her doing the things she sometimes did, where she was deciding whether to say the version she'd already edited or the actual version. Can I come by? Before I drive back, just for an hour. I want to see Maisie, and I just want to see you in daylight, in normal circumstances, before I go back to everything else. Of course, he said. I'm not going to be good company. I want you to know that going in. I'm tired and I probably look terrible, and I'm going to be mostly thinking about my Monday morning call, even when I'm not talking about it. Victoria. What? Come have coffee. Another pause. Then, yeah, okay. She arrived 45 minutes later in the hotel parking lot in the clothes she'd clearly packed for the post-wedding portion of the weekend. Jeans, a worn gray sweater, her hair down and not yet fully dry from the shower. She looked like someone who had slept badly and recently cried and wasn't trying to hide either of those things, which was unusual enough for Victoria that he noticed it. Maisie noticed it too, in the way children notice things adults are diplomatically blind to. "You look tired," Maisie said, looking up from the notepad. "I am tired," Victoria said, sitting down across from her like this was something they did regularly. "Did you sleep?" "Not really." "I sleep really good," Maisie said, with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who has never had trouble sleeping. "Do you want some of my pancakes? I don't want the rest." "Sure," Victoria said, and pulled the plate toward her, which made Maisie look quietly pleased. Landon got coffee from the hotel carafe and set a cup in front of Victoria without asking, because she took it black and had done so since the second year of their friendship, and sat down. The three of them sat at the small breakfast table in the bright, ordinary light of a hotel room morning, Maisie drawing, Victoria eating leftover pancakes, and for a stretch of maybe 20 minutes, nobody said anything that mattered, and all of it felt improbably like exactly the right thing. Victoria set down her fork and looked at him. "I want to talk about what you said yesterday." Maisie looked up. "Bug," Landon said, "can you go watch something in the other room for a bit?" Maisie looked between them with the expression of a child conducting a rapid assessment. Whatever she concluded apparently satisfied her, because she slid off the chair without argument, took the notepad with her, and disappeared around the corner with the tactful discretion of a person who has lived with adults long enough to know when she's not the intended audience. Victoria watched her go. "She's remarkable," she said. "She's something. She gets it from you." She looked back at him. The knowing what's needed without being asked. "She does that. You do that." "You do too," he said. "I do it professionally." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Personally, I'm historically bad at it. I've been told this by multiple people who are not wrong." "You were doing it this morning," he said. "Pancakes." She looked at him, and he watched her understand that he had seen that clearly. She looked briefly like she wanted to qualify it, and then didn't. "I wanted to talk about what you said," she said again. "Okay. Not the fact of it. I believe you. I'm not asking you to justify it or explain it again." She was looking at the cup, then at him. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say the whole thing before you respond." "Go ahead." "I have felt—" She stopped, started again. "For a long time, I have felt something when you're not around that I filed under missing a friend. And when you're in the room, something that I filed under comfort. And there were moments, specific moments, I can name them, they go back years, where what I felt was neither of those things, and I filed those under—" She shook her head slightly. "Under something I didn't look at closely, because you were the thing that was stable. You were the thing I counted on, and I was afraid that if I looked at it directly, it would become something complicated, and I would lose it." He waited. "What I'm saying is—" Her jaw tightened for a second, the way it did when she was pushing through something. "I'm not good at this. At saying this kind of thing. I can run a quarterly review in front of 60 investors without notes, and I cannot do this without feeling like I'm going to fall off a ledge." "You're doing fine," he said. "I'm not finished." "I know. You're still doing fine." She looked at him for a second, steadied. "What I'm saying is that I don't know yet what this is, or what it's going to be, or how much I already feel and haven't been looking at. I need time to figure that out. Real time, I'm not asking for distance. I'm asking for the chance to understand it without being rushed by what happened yesterday." "I'm not rushing you," he said. "I know. I'm explaining myself anyway, because that's what I do." A ghost of a smile. "I process out loud. I know. And I need you to know that whatever this turns into—" She held his gaze. "You being the person who stepped forward yesterday, who stood there, what you said." Her voice went somewhere slightly unsteady for just a moment, and she brought it back. "That's going to take me a while to calibrate, because I've had people tell me they love me before, and it has never once felt like that." "Like what?" She thought about it. "Like something true," she said. "That was just already true and had been, and I hadn't been looking at it." The room was very quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. Maisie could be heard faintly in the next room, talking to herself in the way she did when she was drawing, a running narrative of whatever world she was creating. "Okay," Landon said. "Okay," she said. "I'll wait." "You've been waiting 11 years," she said. "That's not... I don't want you to... I'm not waiting in the other way," he said. "Not in the way I was. This is different. This is..." He thought about it. "This is being in the same direction. That's different from waiting at a distance." She looked at him for a long moment. He watched something settle in her, the way it had settled in the vineyard when he'd taken her hand. That particular kind of release. "Same direction," she said. "Yeah." She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Maisie's voice drifted in from the other room, narrating her drawing world with great authority. They sat with it. It was not a perfect morning. Victoria was tired in a way that sat visibly on her, the kind of tired that was more than sleep, and somewhere in the back of her eyes was the whole reckoning she still had ahead of her. The unread messages, the Monday call, Marcus's number in her phone, the months of recalibration. None of that was resolved. None of it was going to be resolved over hotel coffee. But she was here, in jeans and a gray sweater with her hair still damp, eating Maisie's leftover pancakes, and she had said the things she'd come to say. And Landon Pierce, for the first time in 11 years, had absolutely no interest in filing anything away. She drove back to the city alone, which was how Victoria handled most things she needed to think through. 3 hours on the highway with the radio off and the window cracked 2 inches, the cool air coming in and the landscape changing from vineyard hills to flatland to the gray-brown sprawl of the Bay Area expanding around her. She thought about the board call. She thought about the quarterly numbers, which were fine but not exceptional and would require a specific kind of framing. She thought about the 3 senior staff members who had been at the wedding and would arrive Monday morning carrying the same information as everyone else who had been there, and about how to handle that without making it a thing that became the office narrative for the next 6 months. She thought about Landon, not deliberately. She thought about this board call, and then she was thinking about Landon, and she thought about the quarterly numbers, and then she was thinking about Landon, and eventually she stopped trying to redirect and just let it be present, the whole complicated weight of it riding in the passenger seat beside her for the remaining 90 minutes. She had told him the truth in that hotel room. She had said the real version, not the edited one, and it had cost her something to do that. Not because it was painful exactly, but because Victoria Sinclair did not generally make a practice of saying things before she understood them completely. She was a person who organized her thoughts before presenting them. She had given him a half-constructed thing, still in progress, and trusted him to understand it as such. He had understood it. Of course he had. That was the part she was still adjusting to. The knowledge that the person best equipped to receive her unfinished thoughts was not someone she had recently discovered, but someone who had been there for 11 years, quietly, reliably, arguing back when she needed it and staying quiet when she needed that instead. And she had been looking directly at him the entire time without seeing what she was looking at. It made her feel, on and off during the drive, like a person who has been solving a difficult problem with the wrong method for years and has just noticed, with great clarity, exactly where they went wrong. She did not find this comfortable. The Monday board call ran 47 minutes. It should have run 90. She got through it by being more precise than usual and less interested than usual in the conversational detours that board members sometimes take when they're feeling expansive. And when it was done, she sat in her office chair for 4 minutes, looking at the ceiling before her assistant knocked and told her that her 11 o'clock had arrived early. Her 11 o'clock was Marcus. She had not agreed to this meeting. She had not declined it either, which she recognized was its own kind of answer. When her assistant had mentioned Friday afternoon that Marcus Shaw had called the office and was requesting a brief meeting early the following week, Victoria had said put it tentatively on Tuesday, and I'll decide by Sunday night. Sunday night had arrived and she had not decided, so it had remained on Tuesday, and now it was Tuesday and he was in the lobby. She told her assistant to send him up. He looked the way Marcus always looked, composed, well-dressed, carrying himself with the ease of a man who has rarely been in a room where he didn't feel he belonged. He had the expression he used for difficult conversations, which was attentive and slightly contrite, and which she had once found reassuring and now found, with the shifted perspective of the last 72 hours, more calculated than she'd given it credit for. He sat in the chair across from her desk. She did not come around to the sitting area. She stayed behind her desk, which she knew he noticed and which she had decided about before he walked in. "I appreciate you seeing me," he said. "I have 20 minutes, she said. "What did you want to say?" He looked at her for a moment. Whatever he'd prepared for, and she could see that he'd prepared, the specific tidiness of his posture, he had not prepared for this version of her. The version behind the desk with 20 minutes and no interest in a preamble. "I want to explain what happened," he said. "Okay. I had been—" He stopped, started differently. "I knew for about 2 weeks that I couldn't go through with it, and I handled that badly, catastrophically badly. I know that." "You did," she said. "Go on." He shifted slightly. "There were things I was feeling that I didn't know how to say about—" He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "About us. About whether what we had was something that, whether I was marrying you for the right reasons, or because it made sense, because it looked right, because on paper we made sense." Victoria said nothing. "I should have told you weeks ago. Instead, I let it get to—" He made a gesture that encompassed everything, the week, the vineyard, the altar. "I handled it badly. I'm saying that clearly. But what I need you to understand is that leaving it wasn't about someone else. It wasn't about a specific thing you did or didn't do. It was about me not being honest with myself, and then not being honest with you, and then—" He stopped. "And then," she said, "making me find out at the altar, in front of 250 people with phones." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I know. There's no version of that I can defend." "No," she agreed. "There isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I also want to address what happened with Landon." He said the name carefully, the way people say names when they're trying to appear neutral about them. "Landon is not part of this conversation," she said. "Victoria, he's not," she said, and her voice was even and final in the way her voice got when she was done discussing something. "What happened with Landon has nothing to do with your decision or your timeline. He stepped forward after you were already gone. That's the sequence. Any other framing of it is inaccurate." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I know you believe that. It's true." "I know you believe it's true." He said it without heat, which was more irritating than if he'd said it with some. "But he's been in love with you for—" "I noticed it the first time I met him. I told you I noticed it." "You told me you thought he had feelings for me. I told you you were wrong. It turns out I was the one who was wrong about that. But that's between me and Landon, and it has nothing to do with what you did." "I'm not trying to blame him." "Good. Then don't." Another silence. He leaned forward slightly. "I made a mistake, Victoria. A serious one. But I'm sitting here telling you that I'm aware of it, and I'm asking whether there's enough between us to eat—" "No," she said. He stopped. "Not because of anger," she said. I'm sitting here being reasonably calm, which surprises me too. But no, what you're asking isn't possible, and I want to tell you clearly so that you're not operating with the wrong information." She held his gaze. "What broke on Saturday wasn't the wedding. It was the thing under the wedding that I hadn't been examining closely enough. You leaving it was the thing that made me look at it clearly. I'm not saying you did me a favor. I'm saying you made something visible that was already there." She sat forward slightly. "We were two people who made sense to each other on paper. You're right about that. I think you knew it before Saturday, and so did I, and neither of us was honest about it. That's not entirely your failure. I was building arguments, same as you." He stared at her. Whatever he had come here expecting, recrimination or tears or some opening, he had not expected this. She could see him recalibrating. "I'm going to need us to have a separate conversation," she said, "about the Meridian Group partnership and what that looks like going forward, because there are two people on my team whose projects are directly affected, and I'm not going to let this become a professional casualty. That's a different meeting. My assistant will set it up." Marcus sat very still. "That's all. That's all." He stood. He smoothed the front of his jacket, the automatic gesture of a composed man recomposing. At the door, he turned back and said, "For what it's worth, I do think he's good for you. Pierce, He said it like it cost him something, and he was paying it anyway. Victoria looked at him. That's genuinely not your assessment to make, but thank you for coming in. He left. She sat in her office for a while after, not looking at anything in particular, just letting the conversation settle. She had expected it to feel like more, like a door closing dramatically, with weight and noise. Instead, it felt like something that had already closed, and she'd just now walked back and confirmed it. She picked up her phone and texted Landon. He came in this morning. I'm okay. Call you tonight. His response came in 40 seconds. Okay. I'm here. 2 words. She looked at them for a moment longer than they required. Yeah. 3 weeks moved the way weeks move when life doesn't slow down to accommodate what's happening in it. Victoria worked. Landon worked. He was 3 weeks from a project deadline, a commercial renovation in Oakland that had been running 6 months and was finally in its last complicated stretch. And he was on site most days from 7 until 4, managing 2 subcontractors who communicated exclusively through a combination of brief texts and psychic inference. He picked Maisie up from school at 4:15. He made dinner most nights. He called Victoria after Maisie went to bed. They talked every night. Not always for long. Some nights it was 20 minutes, logistics and day rundown, the ordinary texture of 2 people staying in contact. Other nights it was an hour or more, deeper water, the conversation that had started in a vineyard still finding its way out. She told him about the board dynamics and which members she trusted and which ones she watched. He told her about the Oakland project and the ongoing dispute with the tile contractor and the client who had changed her mind about the kitchen backsplash twice in the last 8 days. Victoria, who had spent her career navigating rooms full of people with contradictory opinions and significant egos, offered 3 words: document everything in writing. He did, and it resolved the backsplash issue within 2 days. And he told her that, and she said obviously with the specific satisfaction of someone who has given correct advice. Maisie knew something was different because Maisie always knew when something was different. She had never been a child who needed things spelled out for her. She had lived her whole life with one parent and had developed, out of that particular circumstance, an attunement to his emotional weather that sometimes felt to Landon like living with a small, extremely perceptive scientist who had made him her primary research subject. She asked on a Wednesday night while he was washing dishes and she was doing homework at the kitchen table, "Is Victoria your girlfriend now?" Landon turned off the faucet. "What makes you ask that?" Maisie looked at him with the expression of a child who finds this question slightly insulting. "You talk to her every night. You were smiling at your phone before dinner." "I smile at things on my phone sometimes." "Not like that." She returned to her homework. "I think she should be. I like her." "You've met her maybe a dozen times." "I liked her at the wedding. She let me sleep on her arm." Maisie wrote something, considered it, erased it. "And she ate my leftover pancakes. I don't let most people eat my food." "That's a very high bar." "It is," Maisie agreed without irony. Landon dried his hands and came to sit across from her at the table. "It's complicated, Bug. She went through something hard recently, and we're figuring it out." Maisie considered this with the focused attention she gave to things that mattered to her. "Is the complicated part that you liked her for a long time and didn't say anything?" He looked at her. "Where did you get that?" "Cal told me," she said simply. "Cal told a 7-year-old. He said you'd been in love with her since before I was born, and it was the most obvious thing anyone had ever seen, and you were very stubborn about it." She recited this with the neutral accuracy of a child reporting something they've memorized. He said the wedding was actually a good thing even though it seemed bad. Landon sat with that for a moment. "Cal is not wrong, but he also shouldn't be having this conversation with you." I asked him. "Why?" She shrugged, the elaborate full-shoulder shrug of a 7-year-old for whom some things are too obvious to explain. "Because you wouldn't tell me, and I wanted to know." She looked up at him. "I think she makes you different." "Different how?" "Like," she searched for the word with the effortful concentration she always applied to saying something precisely. "Like you're more like yourself. When you talk about her, you're more like your actual self." Landon looked at his daughter, this person who had arrived in his life 7 years ago and had proceeded to be, consistently, one of the clearest sources of truth he had access to. "Yeah," he said quietly. I think that's probably right. Maisie returned to her homework, satisfied. Then you should figure out the complicated part faster, she said. I want her to come for dinner. I'll see what I can do, he said. Victoria came for dinner the following Saturday. It was not a significant occasion by design. That was deliberate on both their parts. She arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of wine she didn't need to bring and a small paperback book she'd seen at a store that week and thought Maisie might like, which she handed over at the door with the slightly awkward delivery of someone who is not yet entirely sure of the gesture. Maisie received it with absolute gravity, turned it over, read the back, and said thank you, with the sincerity of someone who actually meant it. Then she disappeared to her room to begin it immediately, which Victoria seemed to find both startling and deeply pleasing. That went well, she said, stepping inside. You've just been inducted, Landon said. She doesn't read books from just anyone. What's the criteria? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure, but you cleared it. He had made pasta, not because it was the most impressive thing he could cook, but because it was what he actually made on Saturday nights, and he had decided, a few days ago, that the version of this evening that required him to perform anything was not the version he wanted. Victoria could eat pasta from a pot he'd been making for 5 years, or she could not, but he wasn't going to start something new for the occasion of it. She sat at the kitchen counter while he finished the sauce, and she opened the wine, and they talked the way they'd been talking for the last 3 weeks. Easily, with the rhythm they'd always had, and the new thing underneath it that was still finding its shape. How was the week? He said. The Meridian conversation happened. She said it with the tone of something completed rather than ongoing. We sorted out the joint project terms. Professionally, it'll be fine. Personally, I think he wanted to have a different conversation than the one I gave him. What kind of different conversation? The kind where I'm either angrier or more forgiving. Something he could argue back against. She turned the wine glass slowly. I think he found me being reasonable more unsettling than the other options. That's because you were reasonable for your benefit, not his. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Exactly that. She was quiet for a moment, watching him stir. I've been thinking about something I want to say to you and trying to figure out the right way to say it. He kept stirring. Okay. I told you in the hotel room that I needed time to understand what I was feeling, and I've had 3 weeks, which is not a long time, but it's also... She stopped. I'm not a person who needs a lot of time to know things. I'm a person who sometimes refuses to acknowledge what I already know, which is different, and I've been refusing to acknowledge something for a while, and She set the glass down. I'm done refusing. He turned off the burner and turned to face her. I love you, she said. She said it the way she'd delivered difficult information in difficult rooms for years, clearly without softening, without the additional architecture of qualifications around it. I don't know exactly what shape this is going to take, or how we're going to navigate the practical reality of my life and your life and Maisie. I don't have a plan for any of that yet, but I know what I know. He was very still. You said you'd loved me since the lamp, she said. I've been going through my own timeline. She met his eyes. I think I've loved you for almost as long. I think I knew it for real the night your daughter's mother left. When I drove to your apartment and you answered the door and you looked... Her voice went careful for a moment, feeling its way. You looked like someone who had just had the floor pulled out from under them. And something happened to me when I saw you like that. Something I did not examine. Because the appropriate response in that situation is to be a good friend, and that's what I did, and I put everything else away. Landon said nothing for a long moment. I'm not good at this, she said, saying this. I want you to know I'm aware of how I sound. You sound honest, he said. I'm trying to be. You don't sound like someone performing it. I'm not. She held his gaze. I'm also not going to pretend I'm not scared. I am. This is the thing that is most... She made a small gesture. This is the relationship that matters most to me. What we already have, what we've had. And changing it means there's a version where it breaks. And I don't... Hey! He moved around the counter and stopped in front of her, close. What we already have isn't what's at risk. The thing at risk was spending the rest of our lives pretending we didn't feel this, and we already failed at that. She looked up at him. On a scale of 1 to 10, how long have you wanted to say that? Since approximately the hotel room. I've been waiting for you to get here first. She laughed. The real one, the slightly broken-edged one that he'd been cataloging for 11 years and now understood differently. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder for a moment, the same gesture as the vineyard, and he put one hand at the back of her head the same way he had then. Same direction, she said, muffled against his shoulder. Same direction, he said. Somewhere down the hall, Maisie's bedroom door opened. Her footsteps crossed the hall and stopped at the kitchen doorway. There was a brief silence. "Are you guys doing a hug?" she said. "Yeah, Bug." "Okay." A pause. "Is dinner ready? I'm hungry." Victoria laughed against his shoulder again, and this time it was all the way there, warm and real. "Almost," Landon said. "Give us a minute." "You've already had a minute," Maisie pointed out with absolute accuracy. 2 minutes. A heavy sigh from the doorway. Then footsteps retreating. Victoria pulled back and looked at him, her eyes bright, not from crying, from something else, the particular aliveness of a moment that is exactly what it should be and knows it. "Your daughter," she said, "runs a tight ship." "She really does." He studied her face, the tiredness still in it, the weeks of recalibrating, and underneath all of that something that had not been there before. At the vineyard or in the hotel room, something settled and present. "You good?" "Yeah," she said. And then, like she was testing the weight of it, "Yeah, I actually am." He believed her. He went back to the stove and finished the pasta. She poured 2 glasses of wine and set the table without being asked, moving through his kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had been in this space hundreds of times and the new awareness of someone who was now in it differently. Maisie came back and climbed into her chair and immediately began telling Victoria about the book, which she had already read 20 pages of and had strong feelings about. Victoria listened with genuine attention, asking questions that were not condescending, following the thread of Maisie's analysis with the same focused engagement she brought to board meetings. Landon watched this from across the table, his daughter, his kitchen, his Saturday night, and felt the particular unfamiliar sensation of something coming together. Not neatly, not without complication still ahead, because there was complication ahead, there always was. Victoria had a company and a schedule and a life that operated at a different scale than his. He had a daughter and a work calendar and the apartment that was going to require some reorganization of everyone's assumptions. None of it was simple. But they were at the table together, which was more than he had allowed himself to imagine for a very long time, and the woman across from him was asking his daughter about Chapter 2 with the same directness and lack of condescension she brought to everything, and Maisie was answering her like she was answering someone she'd already decided could be trusted. He thought about the message he'd gotten on his phone that first night. The 415 number. "I'm not finished either." He had not told Victoria about it. He had thought about telling her and decided she had enough to carry without adding that to it. But it was there, somewhere in the back of his awareness, the particular phrasing of it, not angry, not finished. He set it aside for now, the way you set aside a sound you heard in the dark that might have been nothing. Not because he thought it was nothing, but because the table was full and the wine was open and Maisie was explaining Chapter 2 with great authority. Some things could wait until they couldn't. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks later, while Victoria was in a one-on-one with her head of operations. It was her assistant on the intercom, which she ignored, and then a text, which she glanced at, and the text said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a man in the lobby who says he represents Marcus Shaw's legal team, and he says it's regarding a formal complaint filed with the Sinclair Group Board of Directors." She looked at the text for 1 full second. Then she said, "Give me a moment," to her head of operations, who had the professional tact to find something on her laptop to attend to. Victoria stood up and walked to the window because she thought better standing and looking at something distant, and she read the text again. And she felt the thing she felt at the altar. Not panic, never panic, but the deep structural recalibration of a person who has just realized the ground is shaped differently than she thought. She typed back, "Put him in conference room B. Get me the board chair's assistant on the phone. And call Landon Pierce and tell him I need him to call me when he's out of whatever he's in." She put the phone in her pocket. She turned back to her head of operations, who was still very professionally focused on her laptop. We need to move this meeting to Thursday, Victoria said, in the voice she used when things were in motion and the only direction was forward. Something's come up. The man in conference room B was named Gerald Fitch, and he had the specific kind of stillness that lawyers develop after years of delivering bad news in neutral tones. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with a briefcase that was either very expensive or very old, and had arrived at the same destination from different directions. He stood when Victoria entered, which she noted, and offered his hand, which she shook, and sat back down when she sat, which told her he'd been coached on her or had done his homework. She had her own attorney on the phone in her earpiece, a woman named Sandra Cho, who had been on retainer with the Sinclair Group for 4 years and who had told Victoria in the 90 seconds between the lobby alert and this meeting to say as little as possible and to not confirm or deny anything until they had spoken privately. Victoria set her phone face up on the table between them and said, "My attorney is listening. Go ahead." Fitch opened the briefcase. He removed a document, set it in front of her without sliding it across, the careful staging of a man who understood that physical gestures in these rooms carry meaning. Mr. Shaw has filed a formal grievance with the Sinclair Group Board of Directors, citing a breach of fiduciary responsibility and alleging conduct unbecoming of a CEO during the period immediately preceding and following the dissolution of their personal engagement. Victoria looked at the document. She did not touch it. "He's alleging," Fitch continued, "itam chemichantud," with the even delivery of someone reading from a score, that certain decisions made in the 6 weeks before the wedding, specifically 2 partnership extensions and 1 vendor contract, were influenced by personal considerations related to his business interests, and that the subsequent public circumstances of the wedding dissolution were managed in a manner intended to cause reputational damage. "The reputational damage," Victoria said, and kept her voice as flat as she could, "caused by the dissolution of the engagement. Yes. Which he initiated at the altar." Fitch looked at her. "Mr. Shaw's position is that the circumstances of the wedding were partly precipitated by—" "Sandra," Victoria said. "I'm here," Sandra said in her ear. "Don't respond to the framing. Ask for the specific documents referenced in items 2 and 3. Victoria looked at Fitch. "I'd like to see the specific documentation supporting the partnership extension claim. Dates, decision records, and the chain of approval for each." Fitch's expression shifted, barely, the slight repositioning of a man who has been met with more precision than he expected from this side of the table. "Those can be provided in discovery, should the matter proceed to it." "Then we're done for today," Victoria said. She stood. "You've delivered the document. I've received it. My attorney will be in contact within 48 hours. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for the end of conversations that other people were trying to extend. "Thank you for coming in." Fitch stood, which he had to do because she was already moving toward the door. "Ms. Sinclair, I want to emphasize that Mr. Shaw's preference is to resolve this without—" "Sandra will be in contact," she said, and stepped into the hallway. She walked directly to her office, closed the door, and stood with her back against it for approximately 15 seconds. Not collecting herself, she was collected. She had been collected throughout. It was the only reliable tool she had in rooms like that one. She was just letting herself acknowledge, privately, that Marcus Shaw had turned their personal wreckage into a legal instrument, and that she had not quite believed until this moment that he would. "Victoria," Sandra's voice in her ear, "talk to me." "He's filing a board grievance." "I heard. The partnership extension claim is thin. You have documented approval processes, and he knows it. The public conduct allegation is weaker still. He's not trying to win, he's trying to create noise." "Why?" A pause. "My best guess? He wants to sit back down across from you. He wants leverage for a conversation you told him was over." Victoria moved to her desk, sat. "What do I need to do?" "Pull the documentation on both partnerships tonight. Send them to me. I'll have a response drafted by Thursday. And Victoria," Sandra's voice shifted slightly, "is there anything in those contracts that could look problematic with framing? I'm not asking if it's problematic. I'm asking if it could be framed that way." Victoria thought about the Meridian Group extension, the timing of it, The fact that it had been proposed by her VP of Partnerships 3 weeks before the engagement ended and approved through standard process with 3 signatures. The fact that it benefited the company and happened to also benefit a business that Marcus had a minority stake in. There's a timing issue that someone could try to use, she said. It's not a real issue, but it's there. Okay? Send me everything. All of it. A brief pause. How are you? I'm fine. Victoria. I'm functioning, Sandra. That's what I have right now. She ended the call and sat in the quiet of her office. The afternoon light was coming in low through the windows, the city doing what the city did. Indifferent, continuous, not particularly interested in her problems. She thought about the text she'd sent to Landon's assistant. She looked at her phone, and there was nothing yet, which meant he was still on site. She opened her email instead and started pulling files. Landon called at 4:47. She was still at her desk, which was now covered in printed documents and a legal pad with her notes in the compressed handwriting she used when she was thinking fast. She picked up before the second ring. "What happened?" he said. No preamble, which she was grateful for. She told him. Flat and sequential, the way she told things when she needed to get through them without the emotional texture slowing her down. The document, Fitch's framing, the partnership extension, Sandra's assessment. He listened without interrupting, which she had always appreciated about him, the particular quality of his attention, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually taking it in. When she finished, he said, "He's not trying to sue you." "I know. He's trying to get you back in a room." "That's what Sandra thinks too." "So the question is whether you handle it as a legal matter or a personal one." "It's a board matter," she said. "It goes above both of those." "Does your board chair know about the engagement? The wedding?" She almost laughed. 3 board members were at the vineyard, Landon. "Right. A beat. Okay. Walk me through the 2 partnerships. I want to understand the actual timeline." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you said there's a timing issue someone could try to use, and I want to understand it before Marcus's lawyer has a chance to frame it first. Walk me through it." She looked at her notes. The Meridian extension was proposed internally on September 3rd. I signed off on October 9th. Marcus and I got engaged in August. Who proposed it internally? Nadia, my VP of Partnerships. Did she know about the engagement when she proposed it? Yes, the whole company knew. I announced it in an all hands. Did she know about Marcus's stake in Meridian? Victoria paused. I don't know. Find out, he said, because if Nadia proposed it without knowing, that's your cleanest line. The proposal originated independently before any engagement-related considerations could apply. If she knew, it's more complicated, but it's still an internal process issue, not a CEO conduct issue. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her legal pad. When did you learn to think like this? I built a commercial project 2 years ago for a client who decided mid-construction that he wanted to sue the subcontractor for a materials dispute that he actually caused. I spent 4 months in documentation meetings. A brief pause. Also, you've talked me through enough of your board dynamics over the years that I know how the framing works. She felt something settle in her chest, the specific relief of not being alone in a problem. Not the relief of someone handling it for her, but of someone thinking alongside her, which was different and more useful, and was the thing she had always, without naming it, gotten from Landon. Ask Nadia tonight, he said, before you send Sandra the documents. It changes how Sandra frames the response. Yeah, you're right. She made a note. Landon. What? Thank you. You don't need to thank me. I know, I'm doing it anyway. She leaned back in her chair. I hate this. I want you to know I hate this. I was trying to be decent and professional about the whole situation, and he's not being decent, Landon said. That's not a failure of your approach. That's just who he turned out to be when the pressure is on. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I should have seen it. You couldn't have seen it. He was composed for 14 months. People can be composed for 14 months. I know people who see through composed. You're one of them, he said, in a boardroom. In your personal life, you wanted it to work. That's not a blind spot, Victoria. That's just being human. She sat with that for a moment. Can I come over tonight? She said. I know it's a Tuesday and Maisie has school and I have 3 hours of document review. I'm not asking for anything except I want to not be in my apartment alone with this. Yes, he said, without hesitation. Come over. I'll feed you something. You don't have to. I'll feed you something, he said again. Come. She drove to his apartment with the document files in her bag and Sandra's voice on a hands-free call for the first 20 minutes of the drive. By the time she pulled into his street, it was nearly 7 and the city had gone dark and her head was full of legal framing and partnership timelines. And she sat in the car for a moment before going in, pressing the flat of her hand to the steering wheel, breathing. Nadia had not known about Marcus's stake in Meridian. She had confirmed this at 5:15, clearly confused about why she was being asked, and Victoria had told her she might need a signed statement from her later in the week, and Nadia had said, of course, whatever you need with the uncomplicated loyalty of someone who had been with the company since the beginning and had never once given Victoria a reason to doubt her. It was the clean line Landon had said to find. It existed. Sandra had called it a very solid position when Victoria relayed it, and Sandra did not call things solid unless she meant it. So the problem was solvable. That was the actual truth of the situation, and Victoria was good enough at her job to know it. It was going to require attention and documentation and 2 or 3 board conversations, and Marcus's lawyer was going to make noise for a period, and then it was going to be over. Knowing a problem is solvable does not make it not exhausting. She got out of the car. Maisie was still awake when she arrived, which was either a coincidence or the result of active negotiation on Maisie's part. Victoria suspected the latter. She was in pajamas at the kitchen table, allegedly finishing homework, and she looked up when Victoria came through the door with the bright, focused expression of a child who has been waiting. You look tired again, Maisie said. I had a hard day. Dad made soup. She pointed at the stove with her pencil. He makes soup when things are bad. Victoria set her bag down and looked at Landon, who was at the stove with his back to her, and who said, without turning, It's not a crisis soup. It's just soup. He made it when I had a bad week at school, too, Maisie said. It works. Good to know. Victoria sat at the table across from Maisie, who studied her with the frank assessment she applied to things she cared about. Is it the man? Maisie said. Victoria looked at her. Which man? The one from the wedding. The one who left. Landon turned from the stove. Maisie, I'm just asking. It's yes, Victoria said, because she had learned quickly that sanitizing answers for Maisie produced more questions, and worse, less accurate follow-ups. He did something that's making my work complicated. Maisie absorbed this. That's not fair. No, it isn't. Is my dad helping? Yes. Maisie looked at Landon and back at Victoria with the expression of someone completing a logical sequence. Good, she said, with the finality of a person who has decided a situation is being handled correctly and can now return to other concerns. She picked up her pencil. I have 2 more math problems. Landon brought soup to the table 20 minutes later, after Maisie had finished her homework and been sent to brush her teeth, and after Victoria had sat at his kitchen table in the quiet and let the day lose some of its density. It was not fancy soup, white bean and whatever vegetables had been in the refrigerator, with bread from the bakery 2 streets over that Landon went to on Saturday mornings. The bread was good. The soup was better. She ate more than she expected to. After Maisie was in bed and the kitchen was mostly cleared and the document files were open on the table between them, they worked through it together for an hour and a half. She explained the board structure and the specific members who would be most influenced by framing. He asked clean, precise questions about the timeline and the approval chain, the kind that didn't assume he already knew the answers. She walked him through the Meridian extension point by point. He identified 2 additional things she needed from Nadia, specific email dates, that she added to her list. By 9:30, she had a clearer picture than she'd had at 5 o'clock. And Sandra had everything she needed, and the situation was not smaller, but it was more contained. She sat back in his kitchen chair and looked at the ceiling. The thing that actually bothers me, she said, is not the legal part. Sandra can handle the legal part. What bothers me is the intent. He's doing this because I wouldn't let him have the conversation he wanted. He's using my company as leverage to make me sit down with him again. Yeah, Landon said. And the worst part is, she looked at him. It won't work. He has to know it won't work. He knows me well enough to know that this approach is going to do the opposite of what he wants. So either he doesn't actually want back in, and this is just damage for the sake of it, or he's desperate enough to use a bad strategy. Which do you think it is? She thought about it. Both, she said. I think he's desperate enough to reach for a bad strategy, and part of him knows it won't work, and he's doing it anyway because the alternative is accepting that it's completely over. Landon was quiet for a moment. That anonymous text I got the first night. I'm not finished either. I should have told you about it sooner. She looked at him. You got a text from him? I think so. Didn't sign it. 415 number. I didn't respond. She processed that. Why didn't you tell me? You had enough to carry, he said. I made a call and I'm not sure it was the right one. She looked at him for a long moment, reading the honesty in it. Not an excuse, just the truth of the decision and the uncertainty about it. Forward it to Sandra tonight, she said. Already done. I sent it the day after the meeting in your office when you texted me you were okay. She stared at him. You already sent it. I figured you'd tell me eventually, and I wanted it in the record before it mattered. You could have told me then. Yeah. He held her gaze. I probably should have. She sat with it. The impulse to be annoyed was present. She did not like being protected from information, even by people whose instincts she trusted. She filed the impulse and looked at the actual decision. He had documented it, sent it to legal, and told her when she was in a position to use it. The order was not what she would have chosen. The outcome was correct. Don't do that again, she said. If it touches anything related to me, I want to know. Fair, he said. I'm sorry. And the way he said it, no deflection, no justification, just the apology, clean and immediate, released the last of it. She nodded once. Okay, she said. They stayed at the table for a while after that, not working, just the particular kind of quiet that falls when a hard thing has been dealt with and there's nothing urgent left to push against. The apartment was still. The city hummed its continuous hum outside the windows. Somewhere down the hall, Maisie had gone fully quiet, the silence of a child deeply asleep. I've been thinking about something, Victoria said. What? About what we are, what we're doing. She turned the pen in her fingers. I've been operating under a general understanding without being specific about it, and I'm a person who is specific about things, so I want to be specific about this. Okay. He watched her, waiting. I want to be with you, she said. Clearly, I don't want to keep having the conversation where we acknowledge what we feel and then leave the structure of it undefined. I want to define it. So define it. I'm asking you to be in a relationship with me, a real one, not a developing situation or a figuring it out. A relationship where I'm your person and you're mine, and we deal with things like the last 4 hours as a unit, rather than as two people being very supportive in the direction of each other. He was quiet for a moment. That's what I've been doing. I know. I'm making it explicit, because that's how I work, and I'm done apologizing for it. I know how you work, he said. I've known for 11 years. So? So yes, he said, like it was the simplest thing. Yes, Victoria, that's what this is. That's what it's been since the vineyard, at least for me. She set down the pen. Something in her went quiet, not the anxious quiet of deferral, but the actual quiet of something decided. Good, she said. I just needed to say it out loud. I know. I'm going to be difficult sometimes. I'm aware. I'm going to work too much and forget to eat and have opinions about things that aren't my business. All established facts. And I'm going to... She stopped, looked at him with the expression that still didn't have a complete name, the one that had been developing since the vineyard and had been adding new layers each week. I'm going to love Maisie. If that's... I want you to know that's not a performance or an effort. She's already... She looked briefly toward the hallway. She's already someone I would show up for. That's real. Landon held her gaze for a moment. She knows, he said quietly. Kids know. I know they do. She exhaled. I just wanted you to hear it. He reached across the table and took her hand, not dramatically, just the natural motion of someone closing a small distance, and she let him. And they sat in his kitchen in the ordinary light with the document files pushed to one side, and the soup bowls in the drying rack, and the city outside doing what cities do. This was also not a perfect moment. She had a board problem that wasn't finished, and an ex-fiancé who had decided to make professional noise in 3 early meetings in the morning, and a headache sitting at the base of her skull that had been present since approximately 1 o'clock. Landon had a project deadline in 8 days, and a daughter who would be awake at 6:30, and a kitchen table that was currently serving as a legal document workspace. None of it was resolved or settled or wrapped up, but she was here, at this table, in this apartment, with this man's hand over hers, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly identify, she was exactly where she had decided to be, rather than somewhere she had argued herself into. That difference, it turned out, was everything. The board meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks later in the Sinclair Group's main conference room on the 14th floor with 6 board members, Sandra Cho on Victoria's right, and the Meridian documentation stacked in neat folders at each seat. Gerald Fitch was not present. Marcus Shaw was not present. The formal grievance had been submitted in writing, which meant the board was evaluating it without his direct advocacy in the room, which was either a tactical choice or an acknowledgement that his position was weaker than he'd hoped. Victoria presented for 12 minutes. She did not over-explain. She laid out the Meridian timeline, the approval chain, Nadia's written statement confirming she had been unaware of Marcus's stake when she submitted the partnership proposal, and the documented decision process that involved 3 signatories above Victoria's level. She presented the second partnership with the same format. She addressed the public conduct allegation in 2 sentences. When she finished, the board chair, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been on the Sinclair Group board since year 2 and who had, in Victoria's experience, never said an unnecessary word in any meeting, looked at the documentation for a moment. Then she looked up and said, "Is there anything else you want us to know?" "No," Victoria said. "The record is complete." Patricia looked down the table at the other 5 members. 2 of them had been at the vineyard. None of their expressions gave anything away, which was either professionalism or a very good sign. "We'll deliberate," Patricia said. "We'll have a written response to both parties within 5 business days." Victoria nodded, gathered her copies, and left the room with Sandra. In the hallway, she kept walking until they reached the elevator bank, stepped inside, and waited for the doors to close. Sandra said, "That went well." "I know. The Nadia statement was the thing. It closed the framing before it opened." "I know." Victoria looked at the elevator numbers. "You'll call me when the written response comes?" "Within an hour of receiving it." The elevator opened at the lobby. They shook hands, and Sandra went left toward the parking structure, and Victoria went right toward the front entrance and stepped out into the afternoon where the city was doing its Tuesday thing, traffic and pedestrians and someone's music leaking from a restaurant doorway. She stood on the sidewalk and texted Landon. "It's done." "I think it went well. Sandra thinks it went well." His reply came in under a minute. "It went well because you were prepared." "Dinner tonight?" Maisie made a request. She smiled at the phone, standing in the middle of the foot traffic, people moving around her in both directions. "What's the request?" "She wants to teach you how to play a card game she invented. The rules are extremely complicated and change during play." "That sounds like something I could handle." "You've been warned." She put the phone in her pocket and started walking toward the parking structure, and the city moved around her. And the thing she was walking toward was not a clean resolution or an uncomplicated future, but a kitchen table and a 7-year-old with a card game and a man who had been there the whole time. That was, she had decided, more than enough. Patricia Osei's written response arrived on a Tuesday morning, 4 days after the board meeting, delivered to Sandra's office at 9:42, and forwarded to Victoria's phone 11 minutes later with a single line from Sandra above it, "Clean dismissal, no conditions." Victoria read it at her desk, standing because she'd been on her way somewhere when the notification came in and had stopped in the middle of her office without fully deciding to. She read it twice. The language was formal and brief, the way board language always was. The grievance had been reviewed, the documentation found sufficient, the matter closed without finding. Marcus's legal team would receive the same letter simultaneously, which meant he already knew or would know within the hour. She set the phone down on her desk. She had expected relief. She got something more complicated, not satisfaction exactly, more like the particular flatness that follows the end of a fight you hadn't wanted to be in. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep. She texted Sandra, "Thank you for all of it." Then she texted Landon. "It's over. Board dismissed it." He called instead of texting back, which was the right instinct. "Hey," he said. "Hey, how do you feel?" She thought about it honestly, which she had learned over the last several weeks to do with him rather than around him. "Tired," she said. "Relieved, but mostly tired. And a little—" she searched for it. "Sad, maybe. Not about him, about the version of the last year I thought I was living versus what it actually was." That's a legitimate thing to feel. I know it is. I'm just noting it. She looked out the window at the city. I also feel like I want to not think about any of this for approximately 48 hours. "Maisie has a school thing Friday evening," he said. "She's been working on it for 3 weeks, and she would never directly ask you to come. But she mentioned it twice at dinner last night in a context that had nothing to do with dinner." Victoria almost smiled. "What kind of school thing?" "Third grade winter showcase. She's doing a presentation on something she built. She won't tell me exactly what it is. She said I have to be surprised." She built something. Apparently, with materials she sourced from my workshop without fully asking permission, which we've discussed, but the project seemed to matter to her, so I let it go. Victoria looked at her phone, at the board letter still open behind the text. "Tell her I'll be there," she said. "I'll let her figure out that you're coming on her own," he said. "It'll be better that way." He was right, and she knew it. And the small ordinary rightness of that, of knowing that he understood how to handle Maisie and that she was beginning to understand it too, was the thing that cut through the flatness and reached something warmer underneath. "Landon," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for the last month, for all of it." "Stop thanking me. I mean it." "I know you mean it," he said. "That's why I want you to stop. You don't thank someone for being where they want to be." She pressed her lips together. Outside her window, a bird landed on the ledge, looked at nothing for a moment, and left. "I'll see you Friday," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You will." The school showcase was held in the gymnasium, which had been decorated with the particular ambitious chaos of a project managed by third-grade teachers who had overestimated the children's spatial awareness and underestimated their enthusiasm for streamers. Tables were set up in rows, each one belonging to a different student, each one displaying whatever the student had built or created or compiled over the previous 3 weeks. Landon arrived with 5 minutes to spare, which was later than he intended and earlier than Maisie required, since Maisie had been there since 4 o'clock helping set up and had texted him twice since then with updates he hadn't asked for and operational instructions that he had. He found her table in the 3rd row. He stopped. Maisie had built a house. Not a model house, not a drawing of a house, an actual structural model, roughly 18 inches tall, constructed from pieces of balsa wood and cardboard and what appeared to be small dowels from his workshop, assembled with a precision that made him feel something complicated about the quality of his own explanations over the years. The walls were straight. The roof was correctly angled. She had made windows from a piece of acetate and cut them to size. She had used white paint on the exterior and left the interior visible from one open wall. And inside she had placed 3 small figures she'd made from polymer clay, 2 adults and a child, roughly proportioned, standing together in the center of the main room. Maisie was standing behind the table with the expression of a person who has done excellent work and knows it, and is watching for the moment you realize it. "You built a house," he said. "I've been watching you build things my whole life," she said, as if this were a complete explanation. "I wanted to try." He looked at the figures inside, 2 adults and a child. "Who are these?" Maisie looked at the clay figures with the particular neutrality of a person who has absolutely made a deliberate choice and is waiting to see if you'll catch it. "Just people," she said. "A family." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the patience of a 7-year-old who has been very clear and is waiting for the adult to catch up. He heard the door of the gymnasium open behind him and felt, rather than saw, the shift in Maisie's expression. the small brightening quickly contained of a child who has spotted what they were waiting for. He turned. Victoria was working her way through the parent crowd near the entrance, still in her work clothes with her coat over her arm, looking slightly overwhelmed by the streamers, but moving with the purpose of someone who knows where they're going. She found Landon's face in the crowd and made her way toward him, and then she saw the table, and she stopped. She looked at the house, at the windows, at the open interior, at the 3 clay figures. Then she looked at Maisie. Maisie was watching her with the same patient, clear-eyed expression she'd given Landon 30 seconds ago. "You built this," Victoria said. "Yeah." "Did you—" She came closer, leaned down to look at the interior. Landon watched her take in the proportions, the angled roof, the careful window cuts. "Maisie, this is genuinely impressive." "I know," Maisie said, without arrogance, just the plain self-assessment of a child who has done her best and measured it accurately. "I used Dad's dowels without asking. We talked about it." "We talked about it," Landon confirmed. Victoria looked at the clay figures, the 2 adults and the child, standing together in the center room. She was quiet for a moment. "Who are they?" she said, the same question he had asked. Maisie looked at her, then at him, then at the figures. "Family," she said, in the simple tone of someone for whom this is not a complicated answer. Victoria straightened. She was not going to cry at a 3rd-grade showcase, and she had more control than that, but her jaw did something it did when she was holding something back, and she took one breath, and then she put her hand lightly on the back of Maisie's head, the way you do with a child you have decided to love, uncomplicated and direct. "It's the best thing here," she said. Maisie accepted this as her due. "I know," she said. "Do you want me to explain the structural choices?" "Absolutely," Victoria said. She listened to Maisie explain the structural choices for 11 minutes. Landon stood beside her and listened too, and the gymnasium noise went on around them. Other parents, other tables, other small, proud children presenting their work. And the 3 of them stood at one table in the 3rd row, and none of it was grand or cinematic. It was just life, which is the best version of those moments, the unremarkable ones that you carry for a long time without knowing, at the time, that you will. The board letter's arrival also marked, without either of them formally noting it, the point at which the last external pressure released and what they were left with was simply each other and the practical shape of a shared life, which turned out to be both simpler and more demanding than either of them had expected. They were different in ways that mattered. Victoria ran on schedule. She was up at 5:45 and planned her weeks in blocks, and found unexpected changes to her calendar physically irritating in the way some people find sounds irritating, a full-body response she had learned to manage but not eliminate. Landon ran on instinct and deadline. He was good at the large structure and loose about the small details, which meant the Oakland project was always on track, and the leftover containers in the refrigerator were always a mystery. They argued about the refrigerator specifically in late November, a Saturday morning argument that started as a comment and became a full exchange that lasted maybe 12 minutes and ended inconclusively, which was the natural resolution for arguments about refrigerator organization. She organized it correctly the following Wednesday while he was at work, and did not mention this, and he noticed and also did not mention it, and they were even. They argued about her schedule in December, after she canceled 2 plans in a single week because of work requirements that were real and legitimate, and that Landon understood intellectually and found frustrating anyway. He said so directly, which was not what she was used to from people around her. Most people absorbed her cancellations silently, recalibrating without comment. The specific deference of people who have learned that her time runs on a different scale. He didn't do that. He said, "I understand why, but I want you to know it's not nothing when it happens." She had stood in her kitchen looking at him for a moment, recalibrating her own expectation of the conversation. "You're right," she said. "I'll do better." Not a promise to change the nature of her work, not a defense, just the acknowledgement and the intention. He had accepted it because it was honest, and because he understood, he had always understood, the difference between someone not caring and someone operating inside constraints that are real. These were not small adjustments. Anyone who tells you that love makes accommodation easy has either not experienced the kind of accommodation that actually tests people or has edited their memory of it. Love makes the accommodation worth it. That is the distinction. It still costs something. You still have to decide over and over that the person is worth the cost, and they have to decide the same about you. And some days that decision is easy, and some days it requires more than you feel like you have. They had those days too. But they also had Saturday mornings at his kitchen table, Maisie drawing or reading or explaining card game rules that changed mid-game. They had long phone calls on her late nights when she was still at the office, and he had already put Maisie to bed, and he would sit on the couch in the quiet apartment and let her process out loud, which she needed, and which most people had never given her cleanly. They had the version of ordinary that comes to two people who have known each other long enough that the silences between them don't need to be filled. What they had was a life being made. Imperfectly, inconsistently, with occasional arguments about refrigerators. A life toute seule. It was Cal who first suggested going back. He mentioned it in the way Cal mentioned most things, sideways, buried in a conversation that was ostensibly about something else. Over dinner at his apartment in late February with Victoria and Landon and Maisie all present, a meal that had become a near monthly event by then because Maisie had decided Cal's apartment had better snacks, and Cal had decided Maisie's opinions on everything were one of the better things happening in his life. I was thinking about the vineyard, Cal said, in between bites, not looking at anyone in particular. Landon looked at him. Dunmore. I was thinking about going back. He kept his tone very casual, which was a tell. Cal was not a naturally casual person. Good wine. Nice property. Seemed like a significant location. Cal, Victoria said, I'm just saying. You're not just saying anything. You never just say anything. He smiled at his plate. I thought it might be a good place to go back to. He looked up. For a different reason. The table was quiet for a moment. Maisie, who had been listening with her head down in the practiced way of someone who has learned that adults say more when they think you're not tracking, looked up with carefully arranged neutrality. Landon looked at Victoria. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything at the table, which was the right call. But later, after dinner, after Maisie was asleep on Cal's couch, under the throw blanket she had claimed as personally hers 3 visits ago, and Cal had very deliberately found something to do in the other room, Landon and Victoria stood at the kitchen counter, and he said, He's not wrong. Victoria turned her coffee cup in her hands. No, she said. He's not. Is it too... He looked for the word. Is it too neat? Going back there. Does it feel like something you force because it's a good story? She thought about it genuinely, which he had come to appreciate about her. She didn't give him the polished answer. She thought first. I think, she said slowly, that there's a difference between forcing a symmetry and choosing to close a circle. One of those is for the story. The other one is for you. She met his eyes. I want to close the circle. Not because it's tidy. Because that place is the place where I stopped pretending I didn't know what I knew. And I'd like to go back to it for a reason that's true. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Yeah? Yeah? She looked at him with the expression that had been developing since September, the one that had been adding layers every week, and she said very quietly, Ask me. He looked at her. Not because you have to be dramatic about it, she said. Not for the story, just ask me. He set his coffee down. He turned to face her fully, and she was looking at him the way she had at the vineyard, directly, without the performance of composure, just herself, the real version, tired and certain and present. Will you marry me? He said. Not a question with theatrical decoration, just the actual sentence said plainly, by a man who had loved this woman for 11 years and was done being indirect about anything. Victoria looked at him for one long moment. Yes, she said. Same plain delivery, same complete absence of performance. Yes, that's the answer. He kissed her in Cal's kitchen, which was not a vineyard and was somewhat cramped and had a dish towel on the counter that said something about wine being proof that life is good, which was stupid. But it was where the moment happened, and moments don't ask permission about their location. From around the corner of the hallway came a voice. Finally! They both turned. Maisie was standing at the edge of the kitchen in her socks, the throw blanket from the couch wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. Her expression, the expression of a child who has been waiting for this specific event for a very long time and is deeply satisfied to have been present for it. "You were supposed to be asleep," Landon said. "I heard my name," she said, which was not accurate but was delivered with great confidence. "Your name wasn't said." "I thought I heard it." She looked at Victoria. "Are you going to be my—" She stopped. The question was too large for the sentence she'd started, and she seemed to know it. She tried again. "Are we a family now?" Victoria looked at her. She crossed the small distance between them and crouched down so she was at Maisie's eye level, which Landon had noticed her do more over the months. The unconscious recalibration of an adult learning how a child wants to be seen. "We've been a family," Victoria said, "for a while now. This is just the part where we make it official." Maisie considered this. "Like a board meeting." "Exactly like a board meeting." Maisie thought for another moment. Then she held out the edge of the blanket. Victoria sat down on Cal's kitchen floor and let Maisie wrap the other half of the throw blanket around her shoulders, and Maisie climbed into her lap with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who has decided something is hers and is done being tentative about it. Landon stood and looked at the two of them on the kitchen floor under the throw blanket and felt something he didn't have a word for and didn't need one. Cal appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at the scene, looked at Landon, and pressed his lips together in the expression of a person who is trying very hard not to say "I told you so" and is almost succeeding. Almost. They went back to Dunmore on a Saturday in late September, almost exactly 1 year after the first time. Same property. Different season, though the difference was subtle. The vines a little further into their autumn color, the air carrying the particular smell of a year-end harvest that the first visit had just missed. The same white arch at the crest of the slope, looking out over the same long view, the hills rolling away in the distance under a sky that was clear and pale and enormous. Victoria had not wanted a large wedding. This surprised people who expected, based on the scale of her professional life, that she would want a production. She had said no to most of what was suggested and yes to the things that mattered: the right location, the right person with them, the right dress, which was simpler than the first one, a fact she did not comment on but which Landon noticed. Something with less architecture to it, something that was just her. The guest list was 40 people. She had said 50 was the maximum, and then spent 2 weeks cutting it down to 40, because she found, when she actually looked at the names, that some of them were professional obligations rather than people she wanted standing in that particular place on that particular day. Cal was there. Nadia was there. Because she had earned it, and because Victoria had come to understand over the past year that loyalty is a relationship that works in both directions. Sandra Cho was there, which was unusual for a client relationship, but they had moved past purely professional. Sometime around the board meeting when Sandra had said, "You handled that room better than most people I've worked with," and Victoria had said I had good preparation, and Sandra had said you always do. And something in that exchange had established a different kind of regard. Landon's mother was there, a woman named Ruth, who had driven down from Portland and who had cried at the rehearsal, a fact she attributed to allergies while making sustained and direct eye contact with everyone who looked at her. Maisie was the flower girl, a title she had accepted with the gravity of a head of state accepting a diplomatic appointment. She had opinions about her dress. Dark blue with small white flowers, a deliberate echo of the dress from a year ago, her own choice, which Landon had understood immediately, and Victoria had understood when Maisie explained it in terms that were clearer and more intentional than a 7-year-old had any right to be. "It's the same dress," Maisie said, "because I was there the first time too, at the first wedding. And this one is better, so I want to have the same dress, so it's like—" She thought about it. "So it's like the same story, but the right ending." Victoria had stood in the bridal suite at Dunmore and held it together right up until that sentence, and then she didn't, briefly, and had to ask the makeup person for a moment. The ceremony was short. Landon had asked for short because he believed that the quality of a thing was not proportional to its length, and Victoria had agreed with the speed of someone who had been to too many long ceremonies. The officiant, a woman they had both liked on first meeting, with the specific quality of presence that made you feel like you were being witnessed rather than processed, kept to the essentials. vows that they had written themselves. Not polished. Not the kind of vows that sound like they were drafted with an audience in mind. The kind that sound like two people who have known each other for 12 years and are finally being honest about what that has meant. Landon went first. He stood under the arch and looked at Victoria and said what he had actually wanted to say, which was not elaborate. I've known you since you were 19 with a broken lamp and something to prove. I watched you build everything you built. I watched you lose things and come back from them. I was in the room for most of the best and worst moments of your adult life, and in all of it, what I've felt for you has never been complicated, even when everything else was. You are the most honest person I have ever known when you let yourself be. You are the best person in a hard room. You drive me crazy about the refrigerator. A breath. I'm going to love you and Maisie and whatever comes next with everything I have. I am not going anywhere. I have never been going anywhere. Victoria looked at him for a moment after he finished, composure intact, but only just. She said, I'm not a person who admits things easily. You know this. Most of the people in these 40 chairs know this. I spent 11 years knowing something I wouldn't look at directly because I was afraid of what happened if I was wrong, or if I looked at it and it changed what we were. I spent 11 years being wrong about that. She paused. What I know now, which I should have known earlier, you are the argument worth having. You are the person who shows up, not because you don't have a choice, but because you keep choosing it. Her voice went careful for just a moment, feeling its way. I choose this. I choose you. I choose Maisie. I choose the dinner table and the refrigerator arguments and the Tuesday nights when I'm tired and the Saturday mornings when I'm not. All of it. I am done being careful about this. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Maisie had been standing to the side with the basket of petals she had been very responsible about until this moment. And at this moment she set the basket on the ground, walked directly between the two of them, and wrapped one arm around each of their legs. Her face turned up toward them both with the expression of someone who has been waiting patiently for the conclusion of an argument she always knew the answer to. The 40 people cheered. Cal cheered the loudest. He had been building to this for 12 years, and he was not going to let the moment pass quietly. Ruth Pierce had given up on the allergy explanation by this point. Landon looked down at Maisie's face, then at Victoria's face, and thought about the person he had been 1 year ago, sitting in a hotel room in the dark, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, holding the weight of 11 years of careful silence. He thought about all the versions of himself that had sat at the edge of something and found reasons to stay back. He had spent a long time believing that love was something you protected by not acting on it, that you could hold something safe by keeping it still. That restraint was a form of care. He had been wrong about that in the way you're sometimes wrong about the things you've told yourself for so long that they start to feel like wisdom. Restraint is not the same as care. Not saying a thing is not the same as not risking a thing. The risk is always there. The only choice is whether you walk toward it or stand at the edge waiting for a moment that never quite arrives. He had needed a vineyard and a man walking away in a single honest moment to understand that. He didn't regret the 11 years. There was a version of his thinking. He'd visited it on late nights, where he looked back at the time and called it wasted. All those carefully maintained distances and precisely filed feelings. But that version didn't account for who they'd become during those years. The way Victoria had been built, piece by piece, by the things she'd gone through, and the way he had been there for them, not as her partner, but as the person who witnessed all of it without needing her to be anything other than what she was. That mattered. It made him someone she could trust absolutely, and it made her someone he knew completely, and those things were not nothing. The 11 years were not a mistake. They were the foundation. The vineyard had been the moment he stopped building and started living in it. Husk. The reception was held in the same pavilion, and the band played, and this time people danced from the beginning, Maisie most emphatically, with the focused physical commitment of a child who takes dancing seriously and has opinions about tempo. Cal danced with her for 3 songs in a row and was visibly winded in a way he would have denied if asked. Victoria danced with Landon in the particular way that people dance when they're not thinking about how they look, which is the only good way to dance. She had her head at his shoulder and one of his hands held against her collarbone, and she said, not loudly, into the space between them, "Last time I was in this vineyard, I thought my life was ending." "I know," It wasn't. No, he said. It was changing. She lifted her head and looked at him. I keep thinking about something. The version of tonight where neither of us said anything. Where I married Marcus and you went home and we spent the next decade being excellent friends who both knew and neither of us. She stopped. I can't fully picture it, but I know it existed. I know it was the track we were on. It was, he said. What changed it? She said. It was not quite a question. You were standing at the altar, he said, and I couldn't watch you stand there alone. She looked at him. That's it? That's it. No grand philosophy. I just couldn't watch you stand there alone. She was quiet for a moment. That's actually more than grand philosophy, she said. Someone deciding they can't watch you stand somewhere alone. That's the real thing. That's bigger than a decision. That's a revelation about what you are to someone. He thought about that. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. People spend a lot of time trying to figure out if they love someone enough, she said. I think the real question is different. The real question is whether you're the person who can't watch them stand somewhere alone. She looked past his shoulder toward the vineyard, the rows of vines in their autumn color, the same view as a year ago. That's the question that matters. He held her closer, and they moved in the slow way of people with no reason to hurry. Later, after the reception wound down and the guests started making their way out to the parking areas in small groups, and Maisie had fallen asleep in her chair exactly as she had a year ago, and Cal had said his goodbyes with a handshake that turned into a hug that lasted longer than either of them acknowledged, Victoria and Landon walked to the edge of the pavilion and looked out at the vineyard. The lights were on, strung across the dark, the same lights as last year. The vines were the same vines. The view was the same view. Everything else was different. Same place, she said. Different story, he said. She thought about that. Same story, she said. Just the part that was always meant to happen. Maisie was collected, still mostly asleep, and slung against Landon's shoulder the way she'd been slung against it 100 times. Her weight familiar, her breathing slow, her small hand loosely gripping the collar of his jacket. Victoria walked beside them down the path toward the parking area, her heels off, and in her hand, her feet on the grass, the lights receding behind them. There are things you can't plan for, not because the future is unknowable, though it is, but because the things that change your life most completely are almost never the things you were trying to make happen. They are the things that happen while you're trying to make something else happen. The crack in the scheduled event, the moment that goes wrong in the right way, the person you've been looking at for 11 years finally seen clearly. You can spend a life arranging the conditions for happiness and miss it entirely because you arranged them a little too precisely, left no room for the wrong moment to become the right one. Or you can be standing at the edge of something you've been afraid of and choose it anyway, not because you're certain, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the alternative is standing at the edge for the rest of your life watching someone else stand somewhere alone. That is not wisdom anyone teaches you. It's the kind of thing you learn the way Landon learned it. Standing in a vineyard with your heart in your throat, watching the music stop and the silence come in, and a woman you love standing frozen under an arch with petals falling at her feet. Some lessons cost something to learn. The ones that cost the most tend to be the ones worth keeping. The three of them walked beneath the lights, and the vineyard fell away behind them, and the parking area came into view ahead, and Maisie stirred against Landon's shoulder and said, without fully waking, "Are we going home?" Landon looked at Victoria beside him. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "We're going home." And they were.